I'll keep it simple. It's the self that we're not allowed to be in our everyday life. It could be the vulnerable child. It could be the evil genius. It could be the vampiric self. It could be the bestial and animal. It could be, now, look, I'm an only child, and I've spent my whole life trying to learn to be fair and generous. But what if I got to be super selfish and you liked me for 2 hours?
Welcome to Pleasure Science, a podcast all about making you feel healthier and empowered in your sexuality. I'm really excited today because we have Midori on, and if you don't know who Midori is, you're about to be so stinking happy. She's one of the trailblazers in the kink and sexology industries. She is a sexologist, an author, a coach, an artist. I actually met Midori over 10 years ago when Midori was doing and you don't remember, I remember because meeting you was so incredible, but you were doing a huge exhibit at the Japanese Art Museum in San Francisco. But I'm also excited because you just have such a wealth of knowledge. So before we jump into who you are, your expertise, I'm going to ask you the question that we ask every beautiful guest who comes on here. What is your definition of sex?
Oh boy. And hi, everyone. So you open with this. All right. So, definition of sex. Wow. Asterisk first. It is the most difficult and impossible question to answer. That is the simple question. It is a simple question that is impossible to answer. It is so many things. And I suppose it's funny as a sexologist that I'm saying it is impossible to answer, which is why it's a lifetime of research. If I said, hey, I'm craving sex, it might mean that I'm craving an enthusiastic genital exercise. It might be that I am seeking bodily and emotional connection. It might be that I am simply meaning the physical act that leads to a bodily release called an orgasm. It might be, if one is fetishistic, it might be that particular zoned out, hyper-focused state experienced in the presence of a non-reproductive body part or object. Sex is ... And I think what a lot of people, we think it's simple until we grow up enough and realize that it's not. And in terms of talking, even, like a quick hookup conversation, a quick assessment of what do you mean about sex right now? What do I mean about sex right now? Is there an overlap? That could go a long way in making things better for folks, which is my non-answer answer.
I love that though, because it's one of the reasons I asked this question. People don't ask themselves this question. We get this prescribed idea of what sex is. It's when something hard slides into something wet and it ends in an orgasm. And sex is so much more, which is something that I actually learned through kink and BDSM. Like for me, realizing that the definition of sex was expansive and I could make it anything that I wanted to, and I should talk about that with my lover. I got all of that from kink and BDSM. And it's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you, because you've been a trailblazer specifically in kink, specifically in BDSM. You wrote the first English language book on shibari, Japanese rope bondage, for anyone who doesn't know. And so it's so nice to have you here, because I think everyone has a different point in life. I hope maybe it's this podcast for people where they realize sex isn't what I thought it was, or I want it to be more. And for me, that realization happened with kink and BDSM. And one of the most beautiful things that I actually ever heard you say, which also kind of changed my life, was that BDSM is playtime for adults. And
You
so to
bet.
just dive right in, well, actually, let's have you in your own words tell a little bit about your story. How did you even discover that you were kinky, and then develop this whole? You actually call like your website is Planet Midori, and it's true. Like you go to Planet Midori and learn so many things on this planet. But what was your experience with BDSM? How did you find out you were kinky? And then how did that evolve into this philosophy of BDSM as playtime for adults?
I love that you like my definition. So, my definition of BDSM or kink is childhood joyous play with adult privilege and cool toys. It's cops and robbers with shagging, where shagging's optional.
Hmm.
How did I come to this? I've actually never come out into kink, if you will. What I did discover is that other people didn't do the things I did. Huh. Um, so as I was sexual with myself, right? So first I'm sexual with myself, and then so as a younger person, I'm sexual with myself. I had an active fantasy life, and yeah, I enjoyed as a teenager, a kid, to explore my genitalia. It felt really good, but I also enjoyed finding my mother's old fancy dresses and dressing up and putting on tawdry makeup and performing for myself in the mirror, if you will, exploring my identity. And there was something expansive and sensual about that. Uh,
Yeah.
I was a deep nerd. And as I became sexual with other people, not just the shower head in my hand and my wardrobe, um, I was experimenting with things, but I didn't. And so I grew up in Japan, right? And so I didn't grow up with a lot of the sexual assumptions and shame, a different set of sexual assumptions and shame, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't have this sense that there was a particular American way of a normative sex. And because I think I've always been, even before I identified myself as an artist, had a creative angle in exploring and storytelling, that it seemed like I was just playing. And I honestly, I think it was fully in my 30s when I realized, and this is well into already being in San Francisco subcultures, that I realized that that sort of creative sexual exploration was not the norm, and that people struggled to reconcile their creativity against the cultural norm. So I didn't discover I was kinky. I discovered other people were afraid of exploration.
That's so interesting. And I love that journey because playing with clothing and how you look is such a part of kink. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about kink and BDSM is it's all about sex and you're having sex. And again, thinking to that normative definition of sex and orgasm. But so much of kink and BDSM play is about communicating and finding, like, okay, do we have mutual desires and fantasies? Okay, check. Do we want to play with these toys? Is there chemistry between us? Check. Okay, so now should we just role play? Should we, let's have fun? What do we want to do? And sometimes that can include sex and sometimes it doesn't. But I love that your experience of discovering BDSM and kink had less to do with like a hypersexual experience, which I think is what a lot of people assume with kink, right? Like it gets associated with this idea that if you're kinky, you must be quote unquote a freak and into all of these things. And it's like, well, what if you just like being in a pretty dress and someone calling you a princess and being read a bedtime story? That is one of the
Oh,
things,
nice.
like, and
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't have to go further than that, or all of these different things. But I love kind of the way that you experienced that. And so when you are educating on kink and BDSM, like what are some things that are important for you to share with people who maybe are newer of like this is kink and BDSM, and this is how you play safely.
So, what I want people to start to think about is the power of storytelling, as well, story making, as well as the whole body as an erotic potential. Our skin is the largest organ,
Yeah.
and our brain has an amazing, a lot of people say the brain's the largest sexual organ.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and also the skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's that. To expand on creativity, again, that sense of play, right? And on my definition, to clarify that, sometimes people get a little uncomfortable, like, please don't sexualize my childhood. I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
childing our boring ass adulthood.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely. And that's another important part of BDSM that was really helpful for me, was learning also not yucking people's yums, right? And
Yeah.
how people will have different fantasies and different fetishes. We have, the parent and child fetish, student teacher fetish, age play, power play, all of these
Mm-hmm.
things. One of the things that I learned from BDSM that was so beautiful was fantasies aren't weird, and they don't mean that you're broken or that something bad has happened to you or that you want something bad to happen to you. And I wonder if a reason why our fantasies, like, I think because we block off as adults, like, we shouldn't be fantasizing, we should be responsible, we should be doing all of these things. um that then when we finally have an outlet, it can feel almost overwhelming, or almost like you're just face to face with so many of your taboos. So, how do you see BDSM as this healing modality, and what have you seen in your time as an educator?
Okay, so exploration in kink and BDSM, as I was saying, is about play.
Mhm.
It's also about creativity. And we're in a culture that tells us in many ways, overtly and covertly, that independent thinking, agency, creativity, and world envisioning is only left for certain special people. And the rest of us should just leave the genius creatives to that. And everyone else, all the rest of us, should be towing the line and doing the things that are considered normal. We've had a lid put on our creativity. We have, and for many of us who don't have uh, the primary authoritative privilege in a room, so it can be marginalized people, genders, color, etc. We've been told to behave and to, let the people who know better, to slowly strip away our agency and our own voices, and to accept that. In I think of BDSM as a sandbox, a small experimental sandbox where we get to, as you were talking about, standing up for yourself, to explore our relationship to power, explore our relationship to having our own voice, to acknowledging our shadow, acknowledging our creative and destructive aspect, to explore our vulnerability. So, for anyone, this would be becoming self.
Mm.
And I would, in terms of the healing, today there's an entire uh, industrial, there's a healing and self help industrial complex, right? I'm
Right.
not talking about that, which is, I have noticed that there are some people using capital T therapy, capital H healing
Mm.
to associate that with BDSM. And I think I caution against that because it may be virtue washing
Mm.
a way by which to become more free. It's like, if it's not good for me, I shouldn't do it. Like, we can take a walk because it's a nice day, or I should walk because it is healthy. Um, I
Right.
can eat strawberries because I like strawberries, or I should eat more strawberries because it is good for my health. It's like we have to
Mm.
give these adult excuses to just have fun.
Yeah.
Um, so I caution against, I'm doing BDSM because it's therapy.
Mm.
But yeah, and okay, then here's a scary thing out there.
Mhm.
Seriously scary thing. And I've been talking to some therapists who are noticing this as well. There are individuals putting out their shingles as a professional business who are not trained in mental health or helping professions
Right.
and saying that they provide BDSM as therapy. And many of these folks are coming from a more predatory intention,
Mhm.
and that does concern me.
Yeah.
I think anything that we do where we're willing to try to be fully present and to engage our creativity with self and others
Mhm.
has a potential to help us approach our whole self.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we do have to be careful of that predatory because it's so vulnerable to approach your whole self with BDSM, you know. It can be vulnerable to even say I'm interested in someone worshiping my feet, you know, which
Yeah.
is that, and for others that could be like, oh, that's nothing, are you kidding, I peed on someone the other day, you know, right? Like there's a whole level of things. But even if you know your fetishes aren't the most extreme, it can still feel so vulnerable to say that. And one aspect of BDSM, like its play, it can be very healing. You could find out so much about yourself, you can learn new skills, especially sexual skills like communication. But we do also have to keep in mind people who are predatory. And this happens just in relationships and dating in general. And so, because kink and BDSM has an erotic aspect to it, that's a big part of it too. You know, I remember a few years ago when all of the scholarship on narcissistic personality disorders were really hitting the mainstream and people were really starting to figure out what that was. A lot of people in the kink community were like, oh, wait, I think this dominant is a bit of a narcissist. And I think that person, and I saw that a lot in the kink communities. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what's really interesting about BDSM, I mean, one, because we have so much communication and negotiation, and that should be step one, people. If you're trying to play with someone and they're like, I don't need all of that, that's a red flag. You need all of the talks, all the communication. But
Mm-hmm.
but it can be also like thinking of the healing. It's a great, because you're going to run into predatory people erotically no matter what. It isn't something unique just to kink and BDSM, but kink and BDSM will give you so many more tools.
So many tools. Just the
Yeah.
basic thing of negotiation.
Mhm.
As I look back to my early days of becoming sexual with other people,
Mhm.
it's I was a young person. We're feeling each other up, feeling understanding. I didn't negotiate.
Yeah.
No, it was flirty, 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 wanna, and then suddenly it's somewhere dark and feely, feely, you know,
Yep,
um, and
absolutely.
and yeah, nothing wrong with that. But at some point, learning the basic skills of, hey, what do you want? Just what do you want? What do I want? Right?
Yeah.
And the more nuanced negotiation. And for those who think that the negotiation, oh God, it's negotiation, it's boring. No, it can be really, really hot. It's like
Yeah.
it's like mental foreplay, but mental
Mhm.
foreplay with an intention towards mutuality. And
Yeah.
sometimes a hot negotiation in itself is a scene.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what are some tips that you have for negotiation for anybody who's listening who's like, okay, I want to go home to my lover, or maybe I want to find someone to date and I want to have this negotiation. Where do I start?
First step, negotiation and consent with self. Clothespin.
Mm.
So that's the first step. And it's not even specific like I want rope bondage and leather bondage or spanking and role play. It's more at a bigger genre level. It's kind of similar to thinking about what do I want for a meal, right? Am I craving something big and elaborate, or do I just want a snack? Yeah, do I want a little makeout session with a little nipple tweaking? That's a snack, right? And
Yep.
that's kinky. It's like,
Yeah.
well, meet me in the laundry room. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Um, that's like a quickie kink, and the kids are watching TV, right? That's a quickie kink. Am I just wanting a little snack, or am I wanting something? Am I big hungry, or am I little hungry? Right. Also, how do I want to feel? What are the ways that I might want to feel? So, still not talking about tools and technique. Do I want to feel small and precious? Do I want to feel like dark and evil, rare? Am I wanting to feel haughty and imperious? Am I wanting to feel release from all responsibility?
Mm.
Or I could go with the two out of those four, and either of those two would be fine, right? So the first step is, how hungry am I, and how do I want to feel? And if somebody says, I want to feel good, no, 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 no. That
Yeah,
you
you
need to
gotta
break it down a little more than that.
yeah.
Another analogy I like making is going to the movies. I like going to the movies and negotiating or planning what, hey, to my bestie or to my partner, want to go see a movie? Yes. Okay. What do you want to see? Uh, and if somebody says horror, and
Right.
I'd be like, oh God, no. Uh, so I'm going to have certain genres in mind, right?
Mhm.
Do I want to see a rom com? I don't know. Is it a European rom com or an American rom com? Do I want to see a serious documentary? How do I want to feel? So
Yeah.
that'll be the first consent with self. You can also ask that question of the other before they start to get caught up in the technique.
Mm.
It also uh, will affect resource, like time resource. The quickie little scene in the laundry room, as opposed to let's go rent a dungeon or a hotel and have a weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I were thinking quickie in the laundry room, and I said to you, hey, let's play, and you're like, oh, you must be expecting like a big 4-hour scene, we already have a miscommunication. By the way, laundry room, clothespins.
Ooh, for the nipples. I love it. I love it. But see, and so that's what's so fun is like people can misconceive that kink, just like you said, can be so elaborate or this long thing, but you can have a little play in the laundry room or the bathroom or the shower, and you can really make it yours in your home. And kink doesn't have to be all about sadism and masochism. I mean, it's fine to be a pain slut. We like definitely here for that. But also it's fine to just like want a sensual, creative, erotic moment with your lover. And I think that
Okay.
is the biggest foundation. And such a good, like, again, this is why BDSM is so healing. Like, to anyone listening, when was the last time you were this intentional about erotic play with your lover, even if you don't identify as kinky? Like, have you sat and asked yourself for self consent and wondered, what do I want to get out of this interaction? Like, I'm going on a date with my lover tonight. What do I hope to get? And once I know that, how do I communicate that with someone?
Mhm.
Right. So, again, this is why BDSM is so damn healing.
Mhm. Yep, yep. And how the self consent and what I just said applies to, let's just in quotations say, not kinky sex.
Right.
It, even with something like, okay, so I'm going to go for the heteronormative missionary image, right? Okay,
Hmm.
I have that in my head. Could I, do I just have 15 minutes, or do I have all night, right? So there's that. Do I want cuddly sex, or do I want to bounce off the ceilings?
Hmm. Yeah, such an important thing to ask. And I think that that is also where a big miscommunication in like erotic moments happens, where one person wants maybe romance or cuddles or just touch, and another person is like, I'm ready to go to like Plowtown. Yeah, let's get crazy. And we need to talk about these things before, and kink gives you the experience to do that. And so, with you, one of the things that is so incredible about you is you've been in the kink world for how many years now? Like, you've been around for a
Uh,
while.
30?
Yep. So you're like a true kinkster through and through. What are some, as much as you're comfortable sharing, what are some fun memories that you have of kink to kind of give people just to like whet their palate, get their brain a little lubricated of like what's possible? But what are some fun memories that you have?
Let's see. At a very sensual level, it was um, laying on the beach in Hawaii with this sheer scarf or something. It was like a sheer sarong over both of us as we were storytelling a make believe universe that was all centered around uh, desire and sex and where body shapes could change. It was kind of like sci fi meets fantasy meets sex. And we were just
Ooh.
laying there telling stories. That was fun. Um, that was great. That was so that comes to mind. Then there's God, so many. Part of the thing with my years and decades now of experience is I've made so many mistakes
Haven't
that
we all?
I've learned from. Yeah. And so this is a very memorable mistake with a happy ending, right? Uh, and I was at a play party, which is a private gathering of people who are doing kink in various parts of this like fun customized dungeon. It's not an orgy, it's not a swinger party, but it's a bunch of people doing kink and they're very social because they're all friends. And that doesn't mean we have to do the stuff with everyone else, just sharing space and the mood. And I was mostly back then. It was like 30 years ago. Mostly bottoming or receiving, and it was the first time I was taking my then boyfriend out to a party, and I had bought some rope and tools, and the people that my girlfriend and other people that had usually been topping me were watching, and I was a little bit nervous. Right, my boyfriend then I'm doing things, and he starts laughing, like laughing uncontrollably, and I'm kind of hurt. Like
Yeah.
he's laughing at me. And then my girlfriend, who was far more experienced at topping me and other people, sees my distress and comes in and because she had permission to, she comes in and kind of puts her arm around me and said, "It's okay. He's high. He's laughing because you've done good." And
Oh.
oh. So he was having all sorts of like bodily neurotransmitter,
Yeah.
um, the body and mind letting go of control and going into that like uncontrollable joyous laughter that of course,
Yeah.
I was socialized to think that that was somehow, and I was of course nervous. I didn't know what I was doing. Oh my God, am I going to get laughed at? It wasn't laughed at. He was high from play. I mean, no substance, just play. And
Yeah.
that was so memorable.
Mm. And I love that your other lover, your girlfriend, was able to see that and step in and say, "Hey, it's all good, like this is actually a happy response to you just doing a great
Yeah.
job as the sub." But no, I love that. That actually reminds me of a story that you had also told me once of when you're topping, you wear a very serious face. And
Okay.
you're having a great time when you're topping, but sometimes you'll tell your submissives like, I might look very stern while I'm topping you, but it's because I'm very focused and I'm having the best time. I'm sternly enjoying
Right.
myself. And it can be, but again, this is so like we don't think to talk about these things until we're in a situation that asks for it. Something in BDSM this is a BDSM philosophy that I personally use in every area of my life, which is setting the container, right? As a dominant and a submissive together, you work together to set the container. And what that means, and I'd love for you to also chime in to say what it means to you. What it means to me is, me and my sub or me and my dom will discuss what we want. And then I will allow, if I'm subbing the dominant, like I'll say, I want you to be a vampire. I want us to feel like we're in a fun gothic wonderland. I want to be tied up. I don't want to have too many responsibilities. You can guide me here. You can touch me here, so we go over all of these things. And then my dominant, this is obviously someone who's excited to do all of these things because dominants are not vending machines for sex and pleasure. You don't just go to someone and say, cool, I want the vampire package. And then a dominant will morph into that. That's not how that goes. So anyway, but setting the container is this kind of mutual collaboration of what do we want to experience. And then for me, the top will then, kind of create that space and quote unquote container for me to surrender into as a sub, or vice versa. If
Okay.
I'm doming, I'll try to create the container so that way my submissive can surrender. And that philosophy of creating the container is something I use in every area of my life, where I'm like,
Okay.
if I'm working, how can I create the perfect container for me to surrender into a workflow? If I'm out with friends, or if I'm creating like my own birthday party and I want to have a certain experience, how do I create that container? And so, what does creating the container mean to you, Midori? Is it kind of a similar definition, or do you have other things that speak to you when you think of this philosophy? Because it's something that I love, the whole creating the container just ideology.
I like the way you describe that too, because it's also another way to allow ourselves to be more present. I'm not going to say fully present because I think that's a big pressure, right? And there's all this
Yeah.
like stuff about be present. Well, I don't think I should be fully present when I'm driving because I need to
Yeah.
be looking down the road as well and
Right.
anticipating.
Yeah.
Um, but the way that you put container is a way of other people may speak of it as setting the intention, right?
Right.
Or clearing the mind. And by setting a container and a container box, beginning, middle, and an end. And
Mm,
that allows for us to step out of it instead of having to be whatever. Uh, I am engaging in dominance and therefore I'm always going to be in charge. No, no.
yeah.
I am in charge this time for this purpose.
Yeah.
And in so many ways, we are in a world of multitasking.
Mm,
We are in a world where we're expected, so many of us are expected to be multiple things at once
mhm.
and to be exceptional at all those multiple things at once,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And the container or intention or scene
Mhm.
allows us to focus on fewer things in
Mhm.
the now
Yeah.
and then step back to having to do 10 things at once because that's also
Mm,
life too.
yeah. Ah, so well said. And I love that reframe of like, because I get that question all the time, and I know you probably do too. Like, how do I get present? How am I fully present? I want to be present in my body and all these things. And you're so right to touch on the fact that one, that's a lot of pressure. So are we being present, or are we just giving ourselves another thing on the to-do list? And two, that the goal should be more present.
Okay.
It reminds me of that phrase. I think Dr. Emily Nagowski says it, practice makes pleasure. So, another amazing part of BDSM is aftercare. And this is something that we should be doing in our general sexual practice, whether it's kinky or not. But, Midori, what is aftercare? How would you describe that and define it?
So, aftercare is what each individual needs for recovery and to regain equilibrium to get back to our everyday selves. And that's for every individual participating, not just the person bottoming, not just the person submitting, but it's like sports, like after sports, you need a little recovery time. And everybody gets to have that. And I often find that people bottoming get aftercare, but the people who are topping don't allow themselves or think of themselves as needing aftercare. Well, if you participated in any full hearted, full bodied activity, everyone deserves what they individually need and find optimal to get back to their full self.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, I mean, that's just so many things are running through my mind now, even thinking of that. Like, I think a lot of cisgendered men who stepping away from kink and BDSM, but just like will be having sex, but not taking care of themselves emotionally or asking for it. A lot of people across the whole gender spectrum who might be too afraid to ask for what they want or need with sex. And then we have the lovely kinksters walking in being like, all right, well, let me beat you up and then let me care about you afterwards and
Mhm.
bring us back to equilibrium. But that's such a good point too, is like all of the people, in this situation, it is predominantly dominance because I thought that with myself too, where when I would sub, I would expect aftercare and I would tell the person I was playing with, like, I want you to cuddle with me. I want you to tell me I did a good job. And that's the aftercare that I need. But then when I would be doming, I remember finishing out a scene with this one woman and it was just spanking. It was a lot of spanking and you're a good girl. And so I thought like, oh, this is very light, this is fine. But at the end of the scene, she kind of got up, thanked me, walked away. And I just felt I wasn't complete. Yeah. Like I didn't feel complete. And it was really interesting because this happened quite a while ago at the beginning of my kink journey. So I just didn't think to myself, like, I was like, oh, well, I'm the top. I don't need aftercare. Or if I do, I take care of that for myself because I'm like, almost as if like I'm my own parent or something when actually it would have been great if she turned around and said like, thank you, mistress, that was a great job, gave me a hug, like just do something to make the whole erotic moment feel complete. And I think that's what's also really helpful about aftercare is it isn't just bringing us to equilibrium, but there is something really important about making a sexual moment feel complete, like kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode where you were like having a beginning, middle, and end. And I think in a lot of sexual experiences, especially casual sex, there isn't a moment of let's bring this to a close. Let's make this feel complete. Let's make everyone feel cared for. And almost even a fear, unless you're like with a life partner, to say those things, like a fear to
Mhm.
be needy. And so, just again, reason number 811 why kink is so healing and it gives us all
Mhm.
of these things to play with. But no, aftercare is amazing. It was one of, I have to say, for me, and I'm curious actually to hear what you think. So my favorite things that I have learned that have been life giving things about kink is negotiation and aftercare. And of course, all the
Mhm.
fun play, we love all of that. But in terms of things that have really given back to my life, learning how to talk and negotiate and learning about aftercare were life changing. What were some life-changing things for you with kink and BDSM?
Well, let's see. Oh, on the aftercare, I can give you an example of how I pre-planned an aftercare. I think
Oh,
you,
I love,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
please.
because aftercare can be very different from one person to another. It also
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to be with the person you played with. So
Yeah,
there
that's
was
true.
a, yeah, there was a kink conference that I attended, and I had engaged in self consent and self check in, and I was like, yeah, okay, I kind of am in the mood for an intense high sensation scene where I'm
Mhm.
topping for creating intense sensation. And
Mhm.
I think of sadism and masochism not as pain, but
Mm.
experiencing intense sensation and sometimes even creating an ordeal,
Ooh.
right?
Oh, I
And
love that.
yeah, and intense sensations relative, right? But I was
Mhm.
feeling very, and
Yeah.
so I allowed myself to, if somebody approaches me, I need to see if there's chemistry and if there's a willingness or seeking of mutually satisfying intensity. and even an ordeal. So a couple of people, thank you, no, thank you, no. And then this woman approached me and we were talking, and I'm like, I'm really in the mood for bringing out my dark side, to create intense sensations, to really push another person's body and push my physicality as well. And she was like, yeah, I'm looking for that as well. Like, okay, good. Various other negotiations. I said, however, I also need a particular aftercare. If I'm going to play with my own shadow, to bring up my own dark side, I want to be able to walk away from the scene and to play that evil villain, if you will. I want to be able to walk away, but I actually want you to be taken care of. But if
Yeah.
I were to do the aftercare, I wouldn't get to stay in that lingering, getting intimate with my own shadow. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to do that. So I can only play with you if you can arrange your own aftercare. So we agreed on everything else, but the line in the sand was, I can't play with you unless you provide your own aftercare.
I love that. And honestly, that reminds me of a client that I had this kinky couple where one person was very cuddly and the other person was not the biggest touch based person. And a big breakthrough that they had was realizing that for aftercare, the Dom, who was the cis woman in this situation, she did not like when the kinky scene was over with her lover, she didn't want to cuddle. She didn't want to talk. She almost wanted to have her own space. She wanted to step away, have time for herself. It could just be 10, 15 minutes. And these people were in a very loving, happy marriage, very kinky people throughout their whole marriage. But that was this one point where she didn't realize that that was her aftercare that she needed, was just a little solitude. And so she was foregoing her aftercare to give him cuddles, to give him things. And as we talked through everything, we sort of realized like, oh, you're gaslighting yourself into thinking that you don't need aftercare because it doesn't stereotypically look like what we assume aftercare to be, which is like, I
Right.
want to cuddle, I want to, and so it's like if someone listening, like you don't want to talk much after sex or cuddle much after sex or, or even kink, that isn't you being a bad person. Maybe those are some needs that are
Different needs.
unmet. How do we communicate that with someone and find compatible lovers? Because, with that situation, with this couple, they found a great happy medium where once her husband knew, oh, she needs alone time, he's like, well, take your alone. I don't care. Cuddle with me in 15 minutes. Like we live together, like it's fine.
And if they hadn't had that and had she continued with that, it would have turned into an obligation and a chore.
Right.
I want to share what then happened.
Yes. Oh, yes,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. So she's like, okay, let me see if I can go find people. Because we were at a conference or in a gathering. And so then she says she did. We showed up in the playroom, and I'm actually in gym clothes because I'm going for like, full grappling, right? And
Ooh.
yeah, and I'm like, right? And she showed up with 4 of her friends and lovers as aftercare. And each of the 4
Oh.
took 4 corners and protected our space. So we could go full on Muhammad Ali to Merriweather. We had full physical grappling, wrestling, all of that. And where she got to lose and go through this physical ordeal. Now, at the end of it, okay, my nostrils flaring, my heart rate's up. She's curled up in this like deliciously crying place because that's what she wanted, to let go to a point of tears. And I am like, okay, all adrenaline and eyes dilated, and we were done. And I turned to the 4 and said, okay, it's your turn now. And now I needed to go off to my own to linger in getting intimate with my shadow, but also to reintegrate into my equilibrium. So I walked away, took my bag, staying in my evil genius place, but looking over my shoulder. I allowed that myself to look over the shoulder to make sure she was absolutely being taken care of by four
Yeah.
people. And
Yeah.
then I left the party and I went to a Korean spa where I
Oh.
massage bottom to a very mean massage Korean auntie.
I love that. And you've said this a couple of times. And before we close out the episode, I wanted to dive into this just a little bit. We could devote a whole conversation to this topic. It's something that I love to talk about, but you've mentioned the shadow several times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, the shadow is your subconscious. And there's so much in our subconscious that's sexual, but what does it mean to you? Like, what do you define as the shadow? And why do you like having kink as an avenue to connect to your shadow?
We could go full
I know
Jungian
this is a deep one, but
analytical.
before we
Yeah.
close, just because you've mentioned it a
But
couple times, little,
I'll,
yeah,
I'll, I'll keep it simple.
yeah.
It's the self that we're not allowed to be in our everyday life.
Mm,
It
yeah.
could be it could be the vulnerable child. It could be the evil genius.
Mm,
It could be the vampiric self. It could
yeah.
be the bestial and animal. It could be, now, look,
Mm.
I'm an only child, and I've spent my whole life trying to learn to be fair and generous.
Mm.
But what if I got to be super selfish and you liked me for 2 hours for my pure selfish idness? And then
Ah,
afterwards, I might do a lot of aftercare and caring for you and giving you cookies and caring for you because then I need to like balance out the I got to be super selfish princess child.
yeah.
And now I'm going to be back to the generous adult self. So yeah,
Mm.
the
Ah,
self that I don't get to be. Maybe it's rude, maybe it's impolite, maybe it's taking up a lot of space, maybe it's being small, maybe it's not making decisions, making all the decisions about, getting to be Darth Vader.
oh, I love it. That's such a perfect place to end. And what a good conversation. Thank you so much for being here. You have just so much knowledge. And I love the way that you approach every area of sensuality and sexuality and kink. Just it's so heart opening and mind opening. Every time you talk about these things, I learn so much more and get so inspired to just go be a safe and consensual slut. And like, it's the best. So, Midori, where can people find you and how can people work with you?
Well, I am on social media, a lot of Instagram, a lot of Facebook under Planet Midori, but where I spend most of my time is in my Patreon, where I have lots of classes. I also have my artwork, and twice a month I have live Zoom office hours for all the members. So patreon.com/Planet Midori. I also work with individuals and couples and small group in terms of coaching. My calendar online, if you just go to planetmidori.com, you'll find all my things. And I am absolutely available for individual work. I also work with training therapists and other helping professionals to become more kink aware and savvy through my program, Kink Informed Certification from Sexual Health Alliance. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the Sexual Health Alliance. So, anybody listening, definitely check that out. I've actually seen your classes and they're incredible. So, thank you so much, Midori, for being here. We're going to have all of those links in the show notes so people can find you because I know you want to find Midori. that is it for this week's episode of Pleasure Science. Please join us next week where I am going to be guiding you through a sex positive meditation. It's so yummy and it's really empowering. So you're going to want to listen to that. But in the meantime, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Pleasure Science. And please remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. It doesn't just help us find new listeners, it also shows the entire world that we want to learn this information. We're hungry for it, we're ready for change, and we're ready to be sexually empowered people. So go ahead and leave a rating and click like wherever it is you do it. You can also watch these episodes on the Pleasure Science YouTube channel, which I really recommend you do because you get to see Midori's beautiful face and, really connect and get a feel for the people who are on this podcast because we're real people and we're so fun. And last but certainly not least, you could go to pleasurescience.com to check out our online courses. As a listener to this podcast, you get 10% off any of our courses by using the word Pleasure Science Pod at checkout. So go ahead and check those out. Thank you so much for joining this week, and we will see you next time. This podcast is a Pleasure Science production, hosted by me, Nadège, your resident sex scholar. The Pleasure Science podcast is produced by Laura Moore and edited by Camille Furman-Callot. Our music is by Octasound and is licensed under the Pixabay Content License. To find out more about Pleasure Science and to sign up for our online courses, please visit www.pleasurescience.com.